Hi, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today. We're going to give all of our registries just a minute to um, join before we get started. In the meantime, why don't you all jump into the chat and let us know where you're joining in from today. We want to encourage you all to use the chat. So as an icebreaker question, while you're saying like where you're joining in from, why don't you let us know why you joined today? What brought you to our webinar about communication? And we see people from all over.
Oh, we have someone from England.
Yeah, hey! Ooh, in New Orleans. I'm actually planning a trip to New Orleans sometime next year, so exciting.
Super fun place.
Darren, Michigan. I'm actually going to Charlottesville, Michigan in a couple of hours, so that will be fun.
In a couple of hours?
Yeah. Wow. All right. So for all of those who don't know me, I'm Emily Wengert. I'm the customer marketing specialist here at Spark Hire today. I am so excited to be hosting this webinar. I'm from the greater Chicagoland area. Also joining us from Spark Hire is Alicia Garlow. She is our onboarding and enablement manager. She will be moderating the chat for us today. And so we're going to get started. And I am going to introduce our guest speaker, who I am so excited to have today, Amy Crook, the Director and Head of Global Talent at Glassdoor. Amy, why don't you take a minute, introduce yourself, tell us how long you've been working in HR, and maybe just like a fun fact about yourself.
Okay, sounds good. Hi, everybody. So nice to see so many folks joining from all over the world. It's super exciting. I am the head of talent here at Glassdoor, as Emily mentioned, and I've been in the talent acquisition and HR space for about 20 years. I know I don't look old enough. And I have been managing teams for about 10 years. I started out in staffing and then worked my way into a corporate setting, and then have worked my way up to now heading up a team that not only focuses on talent acquisition, but everything in the hiring process, from employer brand, our contractor management program, our new hire orientation, and workforce planning and strategy. So that's everything in my little wheelhouse now. And I'm just passionate about the experience that we provide to candidates and hiring managers as they go through this very big life decision of changing jobs. A fun fact about me is, well, it's not super fun, but I'm from the UK, and I'm just about to celebrate my 9th year in the US. I live just outside Chicago, and yeah, so I'm not originally from here, but I am. It's very much my home now.
Yeah, and we are so happy to have you today. Thank you again for joining us and just sharing your wealth of knowledge today. So as we get started, I'm going to go over what we're going to cover today. So we're going to talk about the importance of communication in the hiring process, strategies for effective communication with candidates, building trust and communications with the hiring team, and then at the end there, we're going to have some time for Q&A. I do want to encourage you, though, this is meant to be collaborative, more of a conversational type of webinar. So if you have a question throughout, feel free to drop it in the chat. And Alicia's going to try to flag those as they come in too. So let's dig in on the importance of communication. So if you're a Spark Hire customer, odds are you have heard us say one of our favorite phrases, which is effective communication is the backbone to hiring. Communication in the hiring process is crucial because it builds trust, ensures clarity, and enhances the candidate experience, which we love. We find that the candidate's number one complaint while applying for new jobs is lack of communication or feeling ghosted, which nobody likes. Clear communication with your team helps set expectations, reduces misunderstandings, and fosters a positive work environment and relationship amongst the hiring team. It also allows for transparency in the process, making candidates feel valued and informed, which can significantly impact their perception of the company and their willingness to accept an offer from you. So questions for Amy. In general, how do you define, like, what does clear, consistent communication in the hiring process look like to you?
Yeah, it's a really big question because there's many stages when you go through the hiring process. So there's the introduction, and then there's that getting to know you with the recruiter. Then you have that hiring manager interview, and you have the panel interview, and then you've got that little waiting time when you're hoping for that decision. And there's pitfalls, I think, in every single stage of the process that can fall down if you're not tracking accordingly. So for me, it's very much about like making that connection with the hiring team. It's not just about making sure you tick the boxes for the requisition, but also what are you going to add to the organization and what can the organization do for you? Because it's a two-way street when you're getting a new job. You want to be able to demonstrate your skills, but you also want to know, is this going to be a place that I can be successful and feel like I belong? So that's a really important part of the conversation. And from that relationship building conversation with the recruiter, there should be a certain level of trust that, as you go through the process, you have that support, you have that person in your corner that's going to maybe ask a difficult question that you don't want to ask the hiring manager directly, or somebody that you can just bounce ideas off, somebody that will give you the information that you need to be successful in those later stage interview processes. So for me, it's just keeping in touch throughout the process, setting people up and making sure that they feel prepared. So, we have that conversation where it's like, okay, we want to schedule you with the hiring manager. And then, you can take that in the bare bones and be like, here's your date and time and your Zoom link, good luck. Or you can take it a little step further and be like, hey, this is the hiring manager's name. This is the area that they're focused on. These are the things that they're going to want to hear from you. So you can be more thoughtful about your responses in that interview process so that you're going to answer the questions that those hiring managers will have to make sure that everyone's making the right decision. And that's something that we replicate throughout the process. Now, don't get me wrong, like there is times, especially during summer, when people are on vacation or things take a little longer than you would have hoped. And at Glassdoor, our mantra is actually no news is news. I know it's an old one of like no news is news. Well, we take it a step further. No news is news. If you know that the hiring manager is on vacation and they're not going to be back for 2 weeks, let the candidate know. Pick up the phone, send them a text, send them an email, and just let them know what the situation is and why there possibly might be a delay. So they're not getting that feeling of, did I do something wrong? Did I, am I still being considered? And then again, like when a decision has been made, whether it's a positive outcome or not, the best thing to do is deal with that communication quickly and effectively so the candidate knows where they're at in their job search.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, and I love the no update, right? Because I feel like it builds such goodwill between you and the candidate too. Because even though there isn't anything, you're still kind of keeping that contact and staying top of mind with them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Do you have any examples of like when communication either improved or maybe poor communication hindered a hiring decision or process?
Yeah, so I can definitely, not at Glassdoor, obviously, because we're very good. But I definitely, over the course of my career, I can definitely see where it falls down, not just from like a candidate perspective, but also from like a hiring manager perspective, if you don't keep everybody on the same page. And that's why it's so important to invest in your talent acquisition team. I think it's tempting, and I'm going to go on a little tangent here, so forgive me, but I think it's tempting when hiring slows down or we're in a candidate-driven market like we are now. There's more, a job-driven market. There's more candidates available than there are positions. We're seeing that kind of swing at this precise moment in time. It's tempting to take for granted that, okay, there's a ton of candidates and, I can dip in and dip out whenever I want. But that candidate is making a decision and forming an opinion of your business
Mm-hmm.
that will last a lot longer than economic swings. So
Mm-hmm.
it's really important to make sure that your talent acquisition team is able to deal with the volume of work that your business is going to have. And that doesn't necessarily just mean requisition loads. It can mean application volume. So when we have this swing in the economy, at Glassdoor, I would say like 2 years ago, the average application rate would be like 25 applications a day per job. We're now seeing that at 200, 300 applications per
Wow.
day per job. And each one of those individuals has their own hopes and dreams and expectations
Mm-hmm.
of that position. And so we have a duty to make sure that we go back to them to make sure that they feel like they are being considered, that they understand that we've, taken the time to look at their resume, that we want to help them through the process. But that's a lot of work. That's a lot of, a lot of somebody's time to keep that volume of people engaged and feeling positive about the brand. So yeah, I mean, there's the obvious ones where, if you get ghosted by an organization one time, that puts you off. You don't want to apply again.
Mm-hmm.
And then, if you don't get like helpful feedback or helpful prompts, or you feel alone in the process, because it's tough when you're interviewing for a new position.
Mm-hmm.
You're nervous, you want to make sure you're talking about the right things. If you don't get that guidance and support, it can really influence your decision on, okay, is this the right place for me or not?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think too, you kind of started to touch on like kind of having empathy for the candidates who are applying. So I think this is a great point to move to effective communication with candidates. Now, communication with your candidates, we always tell everyone it starts with that job description, right? Their first interaction with your brand. So you want to make sure your job description is accurate so candidates understand the roles and responsibilities and expectations of that position. But being realistic, we know some candidates are not going to read the full job description. So we always recommend to our customers that they shorten their descriptions, focus on the core requirements, and also recommend putting very important information that the candidates are looking for, like pay and benefits, within the job description. We recommend that you display an accurate salary information because it allows candidates to make informed decisions and leads to less wasted time on both ends. But this type of transparency is also a factor of what's going to help you build trust with your candidates. So kind of making that shift on communication to candidates and talking about job descriptions. How can recruiters ensure that job descriptions are clear and focused on those core requirements? And how important is it to include like that accurate salary in the job postings, Amy?
Yeah, no, it's a really good point. So job descriptions really are like your advertisement for your organization. So something that's important to us as an organization is to lead with like our values and our mission, and just to make sure that like philosophically you're aligned with kind of the type of organization that we are. And then yes, of course, it's important to make sure that the requirements are in there, but you don't want this to be a laundry list of like every possible thing that you might like this person to have. Like, what are the key essential skills that this person is going to need to be successful in this role? And then I love the point that you made about salary and benefits.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody just mentioned in the chat about it being a legal requirement to put salary in. That's right. It has definitely in a couple of states become a legal requirement to advertise that salary. But we actually do it for all roles, all locations, and we have been doing for a while. And it's also something that we double down on in the first conversation. So I think people get a little anxious talking about compensation, and we don't always know how to, value ourselves correctly. We could have been in a company that might have been underpaying us, and we might have been there for a few years. And so, we're not really sure like what our worth is on the market these days. So there's tools out there like Glassdoor that will help you kind of get a benchmark, but also how we position it is more like, what are you looking for in your next role? Like your current salary is irrelevant. Like you need to be focused on doing your research on what is the job and skills that you do worth in the market at that time. And like I said, Glassdoor is a great tool for that. But yeah, we advertise the kind of minimum and maximum salary in our job descriptions, so people can see like what the range is that we're working with, and then we'll have a more detailed conversation with the candidate during the recruiter phone screen.
Yeah, and what Sandy said is such a great point too. It's now becoming a legal requirement, so you might as well just get ahead of the ball game, because it could start to become legal across all 50 states and in different countries. So depending on when you're hiring, it's just a smart decision to add that.
It's just good practice. I mean, who wants to go through the entire process of recruiter phone screen, hiring manager interview, panel interview, and then you get to the end and everyone's like, oh, we're not on the same page with comp?
That's the worst.
Yeah.
That's the worst, because then that's all that wasted time and you have to go back to the drawing board and start all over again.
And looking for a new job is a full-time job. Like people who are, working or maybe they're on a bit of a break, but like applying, cover letters, which we don't require, but I know some companies do, but doing the research, that horrible thing where it's like upload your resume and then you have to detail your entire job history in a separate box. Like it takes time just to even get the application in. So there's no benefit to anyone to not have that conversation up front.
Yeah, absolutely. Kind of pivoting to our next talking point, you kind of touched on it earlier, but one of the biggest challenges facing hiring teams today is the incredible influx of candidates, right? Our labor market is always ever changing, but right now we're in a shift where candidate pools are larger, giving companies more options than ever. And so it's a struggle to keep that candidate experience up. But scaling your communication while maintaining a sense of personalization can really be tough, but it's crucial to your team's success, right? So questions for you around this topic, Amy. How do you ensure a candidate, like a quality candidate experience, is still maintained while experiencing this great influx of candidates?
So there's like a long answer and a short answer. Short answer is be careful about how long you advertise a job for. If you are receiving 200, 300 applications a day for a role, like that job doesn't need to be posted for a month. All you're doing is like collecting more and more people for what, and then they're the people that you need to make sure that you keep in touch with and that you give them updates and that you review their resumes. And people see the job still posted after they've applied and they haven't heard anything. Like it's not a good message to send to the job market. If you have got a decent bank of candidates in your ATS that you can review, take the job down. You're not going to lose anything. You can always repost it. It's not the end of the world. So short answer for us is we really are thoughtful about what our cutoff point is for applications. So because most people who are looking for work, they're looking every day. And they'll see the position. But yeah, we think practically about, okay, what is our current bandwidth as a team? What time can we put into this requisition? And we try to be super fair because we really want to make sure that we're getting a diverse slate of candidates. We actually don't post our positions right away. We do sourcing first. So because we know we're going to get this influx of candidates when we post it, we keep it unposted and we go out to the market and do some targeted sourcing ahead of time. So that gives, and we do that for a week before the position goes live. So that gives us the opportunity to reach out to people directly and then start having those conversations before we receive that influx of candidates. Then the position goes live. We've made a decision. The recruiter makes a decision. Okay, I'm going to take the post down after it gets to 500, 600, whatever it might be. And then when it gets to that point, take the position down so you can focus on those candidates that have taken the time to apply. Then you have various things at your disposal, right? You have like AI that can scrape through resumes and look for keywords and help you. But that still requires that human interaction to make sure that the candidate's getting the response. So you want to make sure that whether somebody's successful or not successful, they're getting an acknowledgement. And you can set your ATSs up to do this. So it's like you receive the application, your ATS will send them a response, and they're pretty used to getting this standardized response. Then when you go through the resume and you see like, okay, yes, this is a great fit, you can move them on to the next stage, and chances are you're going to give them a phone call and schedule them some time. And those people are then in the mix and going through your communication wheel as you've designed it. But those people that are not successful, like they still deserve to know why. And it's super easy to set your ATS up with like reasons why you're dispositioning them the way that you are, so that they understand that, okay, this skill wasn't there, or I wasn't, I haven't had this amount of experience in this space that I needed, so that they're getting something so that they understand why they haven't been moved through to the next stage.
Yeah, absolutely. Now we do have a question from the audience from Taylor, who asked, what about if you aren't getting applicants right now, or getting very few, like 50 a month? Now, Taylor, we actually did have a job post recently that didn't get a lot of applicants at Spark Hire. And so what we started to do, just as a team, we all shared that job out. So my advice is rely on your team to kind of spread the word. But Amy, you're the expertise in this area. What would you recommend to Taylor?
So there could be a few reasons why you're not getting applications. So when people search for jobs, generally, it's a keyword search match. So whatever they're typing in, you're reliant on that being present in your job description. So, you might have a title that's super different to the next company. I mean, we've all seen that like the same job can be called 10 different things across different organizations.
Yeah.
So to optimize your job posting, make sure that you've got like title variables in that title, and you can just put a little slash there, and then have different title options. And there's also space that you can put at the bottom of your job description with those keywords in that you might expect somebody who's got the right skill sets to pop into that job search. So you're really optimizing your advertisement for what people are searching for. So that's a basic one, like maybe the title's not resonating with people. And job description wise, you've got to put yourself in the candidate's shoes. As we talked about earlier, yes, you want to make sure that they have those key skills that you're looking for, but also what's in it for the candidate. Are you demonstrating your culture? Are you demonstrating your values, your mission? Are you articulating the compensation and benefits? If you're doing all of those things, then there might be another lead off, like, is the compensation in the right zone for what we're looking for? We saw this going back to like the Great Resignation time, that comp was just climbing. We constantly had to review, like, are we paying like what the market is currently demanding for this role? Is that impacting our applications? And then, as Emily said, just making sure that it's getting in front of the right people through sharing an activity with your internal teams. Hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah. Okay, great. Well, so going back to kind of like our talking points and building more on maintaining a positive candidate experience throughout the process, we've always recommended that you keep in touch with your candidates at each stage, that you're letting candidates know, if they're moving on, if they're not, that way nobody is left hanging. Once again, too, if you're a Spark Hire customer, you've probably heard us say something like, outline your hiring process at the earliest point possible. Having your hiring process in front of the candidates is great too, right? Because that just sets them up for success. It alleviates a little bit of their stress too. They can see each stage, they can mentally and just also be able to prepare for each step in the process, especially if you're using HR tech like video interviewing, which obviously here at Spark Hire we're big fans of. Some candidates might not have used a video interview before, so they might need kind of like that preparation time. But as far as communication throughout the process, Amy, delivering feedback is always something that candidates love receiving. How do you and your team approach delivering both positive and kind of that constructive feedback to candidates? And do you have any best practices of keeping candidates informed at each stage?
I do. So, and this is great actually, because somebody in the chat just put something in about providing feedback and like legal ramifications. And I think this is a really good kind of problem to debunk. So you already are going to the table with a clear set of defined requirements for the role. Okay. And so, when a candidate goes through the interview stage, the chances are if they're not successful, it's because they're missing either a skill set, or what happens most of the time, they're not articulating that they've got the skills in a clear way. And I think like over the couple of decades that I've been in this world, that is been the number one feedback that I've had to provide, is that go back to basics with like how you answer the question. Like think about the STAR method. Think about like being clear about what you have done. There's nothing wrong with that. In fact, candidates really value and appreciate it. There's always going to be some outliers that do something completely wild during the hiring process. I mean, it happens less and less, particularly now that we're in this more like remote environment. But, if something does come up that is, a little touchy, and you just want to say, other candidates more closely match what we were looking for, that's fine, but it doesn't really help the candidate move forward. If it's a case of like, I've had interviews where they've been on video chat and they've been out in their garden and a neighbor's walked by and they've been like, hey, like to their neighbor. And like, that doesn't leave the hiring manager with a good impression. It's okay to say like, listen, my advice would for you, you've not been successful this time, but my advice to you would be like, when you're taking an interview, even if it is on Zoom and you're in your own home, treat it like you're in an office environment. Find some work environment. Make sure you're 100% focused on the conversation. Or, if they were asked a question and didn't get to the point, tell them like there was and this is really driven not by you as the recruiter, but by the hiring manager. The quality feedback that you get from the hiring manager makes all the difference. So the way that we kind of combat that is we have scorecards like in our process, and everything is tied back to either a competency, skill, or direct question that we asked during the interview. So there's no room for it to be like personal or legally like ambiguous. It's all tied back to specific points in the interview process. And if they did do a miss, then we happily share it because we don't want them to make the same mistake again.
Okay, so we do have a couple of questions from the audience. The first one I'm going to address is, do you have any suggestions when emailing the Spark Hire one-way video interview to candidates to get more responses? Which this is obviously my expertise. And also Alicia Garlow, our onboarding manager here. But you can do a couple of things, right? Like I said earlier, outlining your process at the earliest point possible, letting the candidate know upfront there is going to be a video interview. We also have a ton of resources for candidates available on our website. Make sure that they have the link to open up a ticket with tech support, just in case they have any technical difficulties. We find that helps as well. And just if you want to partner with your customer success manager, we do have some other resources that you can provide to candidates that just sort of like walk them through the video interview and explain why you're using it to get to know them better. We find kind of positioning it as this remote interview, as this flexible interview for your candidates to be able to do in their own time also generates a better response, because at the end of the day, that's what it is. It's a flexible interview. So it's all in how you prep your candidate and position the interview to the candidates will get you a better response. Now we do have a second question, and I think, Amy, this one's probably best for you to answer. How do you convey feedback when a candidate isn't a good cultural fit for the company, but has the hard skills listed in the job description?
That's an interesting one. I was looking at that, and I think I'd have to better understand what you mean by cultural fit, because I think it's tempting during a hiring process to let some biases come in, and kind of what you're looking for as a team is that they can do those skills. So if it's a personality thing, like I would challenge your hiring managers to think about what the ad is. We're not necessarily thinking about like, okay, who's going to come into the organization and be exactly the same as everybody else. Like sometimes that diversity of personality or thought can be the difference between making a good team great. They might have thoughts and ideas that your current team wouldn't have. If it's a case of, they outright, like I said, they're sat outside saying yoo-hoo to the neighbors, like as they're walking by, and you're just like, this is not what I'm expecting. I think it's fine to be, the interview didn't go well. Like the interview didn't go well. We didn't feel like you conveyed your skills and experience in a way that would add to our organization. But I'd be really mindful of having a mentality around culture fit, because it's okay to look for people that add something a little different.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Amy. Now we have one more question. Probably, once again, more my expertise before moving on. Does a video interview minimize the personalization of the candidate experience with the hiring team? And Samantha, my answer is it doesn't have to. I like to share my experience interviewing with Spark Hire. Now it's been 3 years. It feels like I just got hired yesterday, but it's already been 3 years. My, how time flies when you're having fun. But my experience with the video interview was there were videos from my future team in there. So when I opened up the video interview, the first thing I saw was actually my potential future boss walking me through what the interview process is going to look like. She also said that she was so excited to hear from us, like all of us who were interviewing. And then each of the questions in the interview were asked by a potential member of my team. They introduced themselves and then said, "Hey, I have a question for you." And then they asked the question. So I could see if you don't take those steps to personalize your video interviews, it could feel like you've removed the human aspect from the hiring and like interviews. But if you take that step and add those videos and add those personalized touches, honestly, from a candidate's perspective, you still get to know the hiring team. You still get to know the team that way. And if you want more information, you can, of course, reach out to us. We'll be sending out this recording later, so you can just respond back to that email and ask for more information if you guys want. But we are going to move forward. I see we're about halfway through. So we're going to talk about using communication to build trust within the hiring team. Once again, we've talked a lot about the impact on candidates and the candidate experience, but I do want to point out one major thing is that your hiring team is the best tool that you have to building an excellent candidate experience and having a seamless hiring process. So once again, let's pivot here to talking about that. So the first thing that we recommend to set your hiring team up for success is having a set plan, having an established hiring process with well-defined roles and expectations at each point sets your team up for success, removes any sort of barriers, any sort of confusion. Here at SparkHire, we're a huge fan of what's called a kickoff call. So I can drop a link to a resource explaining what that is, but basically it's a touch point where you just sit down with your recruiter, your hiring manager, anyone who is collaborating with you during the hiring process, and go over the roles and responsibilities at each step. Like I said, this clears any confusion and sets the stage for a smooth process ahead. And I'm curious for the audience, how many of you guys actually have a built out hiring process? Or how many of you just kind of decide what to do when the job comes up? Super curious if people have like ironed out processes here. And question for you, Amy, do you have any advice for recruiters who don't have that defined hiring process and are working on mapping theirs out?
Yeah, I mean, start simple. Like you said, just have a conversation with the hiring manager. Sometimes it's a good person to pull in, like the HR business partner. Like they might have some team insights that they want to share. But that's really like the minimum that you want to do, is make sure that you and the hiring manager are aligned on what you're looking for in this person. Then you can more effectively have that conversation with the candidate before presenting them to the hiring manager. I would also recommend that at that initial conversation, you work through what your interview process is going to be like and who's going to be on the panel. And not only who's going to be on the panel, but why. I think there's a tendency sometimes with hiring managers to not want to leave anybody out. It's like, oh, I want everybody on my team to meet them. And then, oh, this person and this cross-functional person. And it's like, this is so overwhelming for a candidate to have to go through 8 interviews. It's time consuming, it's stressful. And I think research shows that after about 4 people on a panel, it stops being productive. You don't get any more new information, and it's just extra work for everybody involved. So be very thoughtful about, okay, who's on the panel? What are they asking? And that's twofold, because then you can do a prep call with that interview panel to make sure that they know what they're asking, what they're focused on, what their goal of the conversation is. And you can also prep your candidate to say, hey, this is what the panel interview is going to look like. You're going to meet these people and they're going to be covering these topics. So make sure you prepare accordingly. And then it's super clear, and it's so many benefits for this, like mitigating bias, or I don't know if you've ever been a candidate and you can tell that there's been no prep call, because you get onto the interview and whoever's interviewing you is like, so just tell me about yourself. And you've told people about yourself like 5 times already. So it feels a little bit redundant for you, and the company is not getting any new information. It's not crucial that every person that's on that panel goes through that like resume review call. Like we've already done that with the recruiter. What do you really want to dig into to best understand if this candidate is going to add the skills that you need for your organization? So being really clear about that, I think, is helpful. And just remembering that this is your space. If you're a recruiter or a talent acquisition professional, you're in the driving seat here. The hiring manager needs your recommendations, needs your guidance to make sure that this process runs smoothly. And I think sometimes it's easy to fall into like that order taking role where it's like, well, I want this and I want this and I want that. But you're the expert. You know what candidates want. You know what candidates need. So be that consultant to the hiring manager, and then their process actually becomes a lot better.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know you have already kind of like started touching on that collaboration piece, which I think is so crucial to hiring, right? Because success in hiring, I feel like it requires both sides to bring their expertise to the table. You know, the talent acquisition teams, they possess an expertise in sourcing, screening, and attracting that top talent. And then hiring managers bring that deep knowledge of the roles and requirements and the team dynamics. So by collaborating closely together, both of you guys can leverage each other's strengths, and that leads to finding the best fit for the team. what are Amy, what are some things that you do to encourage collaboration on your team with the hiring managers?
I think it's important to remember that hiring managers have full-time jobs and hiring is not their full-time job. So they're trying to manage this process around their current workload. So there is a tendency for them to deprioritize this, right? Because they've got deadlines and things that are going on. So you show empathy for that situation, but also help them recognize that by dealing with this correctly, they're going to be better off in the long run. So making sure that they understand the benefit of allocating some time, and it doesn't have to be any more than like a couple hours a week, because ultimately you need to meet with them on a weekly basis to make sure you're still on the same page. It has happened. It's annoying when it does, but it has happened when a hiring manager gets, a little bit down the process and they realize like, actually this skill that I thought was really important no longer is. And this is more important to me now. And so having that regular communication with them really helps you stay on track with what the hiring manager wants. And then resume review. Like the biggest blocker for like getting back to candidates tends to be that, we've seen these candidates, we've had the conversation, and by we, I mean the talent acquisition function. We've had the conversation with the candidate. We feel super excited about them. We've pushed them through to the hiring manager, and then crickets. And that is just horrible for everybody involved. Like we need to know, like, are we on the right track? So in that kickoff meeting, as you called it, and reinforce it every time you meet with the hiring manager on a weekly basis. Like, have you reviewed your candidates? And something we do at Glassdoor is in that initial meeting is set an expectation, like a little mini SLA. Like, you've got 24 hours or 48 hours to review this candidate and get back to me, because that's what we need to be able to be effective. And a little tip, if there's some resistance, or if the hiring manager is like coming to the call and they're overwhelmed and they're like, I don't know how I'm going to fit this in, just phrasing it like, I hear that you're super busy and that you need to get this position filled quickly. Can I share with you some of the practices that I've done with other hiring managers that have enabled us to hire this role in 40 days, 45 days, whatever it might be? And then they generally are like, okay, yeah, if you've got some successful ways to move forward, I want to hear that. And then you can kind of get the agreement that this is how we're going to partner together to make sure that we stay on the same page. Communication is an ongoing cycle, and that we're able to get back to candidates in an efficient, timely manner.
Yeah, that's awesome. I know I do kind of want to pivot a little bit. I do see that we are getting close to the end of time here, so I want to make sure that we get to another major challenge that talent acquisition teams are facing today, which is having a smaller headcount. So we see a trend that companies are cutting back on talent acquisition and HR teams. And it's becoming increasingly common for smaller teams to shoulder more responsibilities. So this shift definitely requires team members to wear multiple hats and meet aggressive deadlines. In such environments, it's definitely important to be realistic about the workload and what can be accomplished, just to maintain that efficiency and also avoid burnout. And Amy, I know you and me have talked about this before, but with smaller teams handling larger workloads, what strategies have you found that are effective with kind of managing those expectations of like what your smaller team can do?
Yeah, we've definitely been in that same position. Our team has definitely gone down in size, like since we've seen this shift in the economy. And so for me as a leader in talent acquisition, I look at three things, right? So if you are like low on resourcing, there's got to be some compromises. And so, we either want to be focused on cost. Well, there's cost, quality, and time. And like when you are not fully staffed, to meet all three, something has to be compromised. And sometimes that means having an honest conversation with hiring managers about the time to fill. Sometimes that means that, okay, if we have a reduced team, that might impact cost in terms of using an agency to support that hiring. You know, it's not a headcount commitment, but it is a solution to help finding talent. Or it could be that the process suffers, and that is the one you don't want to happen, because as I mentioned earlier, every candidate that interacts with your brand is making a decision on you that will last way longer than this time period. I feel very fortunate to work with the team that I'm with. You know, we try really hard as a leadership team to make sure that people aren't overwhelmed, and that we're also providing opportunity. So reframing some of it is important. So historically, we would have had an agency work on like our executive hiring, for example. Well, now our recruiters are getting the opportunity to do that. And it's less of like, oh my goodness, I have another responsibility, and more of, okay, now I get to partner with like senior executives across the organization. I get to know them. I get to build my brand with them, and I get to work on something a little bit different that's exciting. So that's, it's looking at it to say like, okay, what is the benefit, not just to the organization, but what's the benefit to the individual? And then they're going to feel engaged with the work. But then it's also having an honest conversation of, if your hiring team turns around to you tomorrow your business team turns around to you tomorrow and says, we want 100 people in seat, like in the next 3 months, that's not going to happen. Just being realistic about what you can actually achieve with the people that you have, because you don't want to set your team up for failure, and you don't want to overpromise and underdeliver. So as early on as you can, getting with your finance and, as a talent acquisition leader, getting with the executive leaders of the other functions, getting with finance and seeing like what the year-long plan looks like, and advocating accordingly for the resources that you need, being very clear that, if those resources are not provided, here's what we're going to suffer from, and it will be a breakdown in process. And then that's ultimately, the business's risk to take, but be firm. Talent acquisition is an extremely valuable and critical part of any organization. You are the gateway to the talent that shapes the organization, that drives their initiatives forward. And so you can't say yes to everything, but back it up with data, back it up with facts. It takes us X amount of time to fill one requisition. If you've got this amount of requisitions that you need to fill, be thoughtful about your bandwidth. Like, do you know how many recs your recruiters can own at any one time? Do you know what your average time to fill is? If you have that information, you can calculate, okay, what is it going to take to get this done? And then you can go back with data to say, like, with the current resourcing, here's what we can do. Without it, it's going to look like this. So yeah, I'm a bit all over the place with that, but I guess the things that I want you to take away from that is you're not alone. Everybody's had their teams downsized and it's really hard, but be thoughtful about what you're providing for your teams in terms of experience, because they still want to learn and grow. Even if the team isn't in growth mode, they still want to learn and grow. So how do you create those opportunities with the work that you have presented? And then be honest with the business. If they are asking for too much, have that direct conversation to say, you wanted to reduce cost. Well, that's going to have an impact on quality, and this is what it looks like.
Yeah. And Zoe, I see your question. I am actually going to jump ahead and open the floor to questions in just one minute. I do want to briefly, because once again, we're an HR tech company here at SparkHire, so we do just briefly want to talk about how HR tech is a tool for hiring. I want to point out that it will not replace headcount. There's only so much your team can handle, but technology, if used correctly, could absolutely help ease the load a little bit. And as an HR tech company, we have seen our solutions, help our customers reduce their time to hire, find those quality candidates faster, all while getting to know their candidates better. And that allows them just to make informed hiring decisions. I'm going to kind of just like flash our products here: video interviews, our applicant tracking system, and our predictive talent assessments. Very quick pitch. With that, I do want to open up the floor for questions, and I'm also going to drop in the SHRM activity ID just for those who joined to possibly get SHRM credits. So let's start with Zoe's question. Do you believe reference checks are valuable? If so, who should complete them and what should be asked?
Yeah, I do think they're valuable to a certain extent. I mean, obviously, there's so many laws around reference checks that, you can't give negative ones. But what we do is think about it more from a development perspective. So we complete it. In fact, one of the senior recruiters on the team actually came up with this process. We had a tool that we were using that sort of like manually sent out a link, automatically sent out a link, and they could then add people's names in and it would send it out, and people weren't reading it. It wasn't helpful. So we're like, okay, what can we do that makes this process better? And so now we have the recruiter reach out to the references provided, like a peer, a manager, and get to that information to help understand, okay, how is this person, what is it like to manage them? What do they need? What are their strengths? What are their development areas? And then we present that information together after it's been collated to the hiring manager as a tool to help make sure that they are being thoughtful about what they should consider when onboarding the person into the role. So it's less about, would you hire this person again? Would you what do you think? Are they good? What were the dates that they were there? Because you already have your background check that kind of covers off those things. This is more about how do we set the candidate up to be successful at Glassdoor. And it's okay to have development areas. It's okay to have things that you need to work on. We'll support you through that. We just need, it's just helpful to know what they are.
Great. All right, next question for you, Amy. How do you see AI potentially impacting the hiring process? I feel like this is a hot topic for sure.
It is. And, AI is a fabulous tool. I use it constantly all day long. If I'm trying to say something in an email to my boss or to senior exec and I'm like, I'm not getting my point across well, I'll bang it in ChatGPT and ask them to reframe it for me. Or if there's something I'm trying to say in a job description, but my sentence, I'm not enjoying the flow, bang it in ChatGPT and it will rejig the sentence for you so it looks better. You can get, you have a dump of information from finance and you're like, oh my goodness, what is this trying to tell me? Or you have a lengthy email from a business partner and you're like, okay, summarize this for me. You can use AI in that way to be way more efficient and to save you time for those pieces of the puzzle that can't be done that way, because human interaction through the hiring process is never going to go out of style. There is never a time when you can click a button and your requisition goes live and nobody's going to have to do anything throughout the process until hire, because you can't well, maybe one day we will get there, but right now we're not there in terms of the nuance of picking up from, okay, the response was this, so that has made me think of another question. You can definitely take some chunks out of the process. Like I mentioned earlier, there's tools that will scrape resumes and look for keywords. So you can pull out, from a big pile of resumes, the ones that you want to review first. But in terms of having those conversations, getting to understand somebody's value that they're bringing to the table, I do think that requires a conversation. So use AI to streamline your processes, to make your responses quicker, to be succinct, to digest information. In terms of, contact with candidates, relationships with hiring managers, all you're trying to do with AI is give yourself more bandwidth and time to focus on those areas. Because ultimately, human connection shouldn't be something that we sacrifice in the process. We're all out there trying to either, build a product, sell a product, and you need to be you need to be a human engaged with that to enable you to effectively build, sell, grow. And so to assess that talent correctly, it requires a good old-fashioned conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think possibly looking at time, the final question is in there. But I do want to say, so next week, the recording will also be posted on our LinkedIn. If you guys have more questions, feel free to drop them on that post. But so final question, do you think cover letters are valuable, or do recruiters not read them anymore?
I can only speak, I'm not going to speak for anybody else, but when I was actively recruiting, I didn't require a cover letter. A resume is enough to review somebody's skills, to say okay, this is somebody I need to have a conversation with. That being said, I have worked with hiring managers who really like them. So if the job requires it, put one together. But again, our little friend ChatGPT, you can bang in the job description in your resume, and you can say put me a cover letter together for this opportunity, and they will do it. It'll come out so quick and it'll be amazing. So yes, if it's requested, take your time, make sure you do it. Even if it's optional, make sure you do it, because you never know which hiring manager might be the person that's I like to sit down and read these. But for recruiters, no. I from my experience, they're not poring over a cover letter, unfortunately.
Fair. All right. Well, so this does conclude our webinar. Amy, thank you so much for joining us today and for all of this valuable insight. Really, really so grateful for you just sharing all of your knowledge with us. And thank you everybody who joined. Once again, the recording will be going out. You'll see an email from Patrick, another member of our marketing team. Will be sending out the email with the recording as soon as it's available. And if you really liked this webinar and want to see more of our webinars, I dropped our Spark Hire LinkedIn. Make sure you're following us. We post about all of our webinars on there, so you won't miss one. And thank you again, Amy.
Thank you. This was awesome. Thanks, everybody. It was so great chatting today. And I'm also on LinkedIn. So if you want to reach out and connect, please do.
Absolutely. Okay. Bye. And thanks again for joining.
Bye.